Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. Hey there.
Hey, friend.
How's it going?
Good. We're melting.
Well,
We're in Texas. Damn hot.
It is. We are suffering through this episode. I want our listeners to know we both have beads of sweat running. My shirt is officially soaking wet. So
glad I used deodorant this morning. So glad.
All for you, our beloved listeners. So I have a topic for you today that if I'm with a client and something comes up, I'm always like pinging you a quick message to like, help, what do you know about X, Y, and Z? And I know it's not a fun topic, but I think it's a topic that very few people know about, thankfully. Very few people know about. But when you are hit with a board complaint, all of a sudden you're thrown into this world that you really know nothing about. And it's not one of these subjects that people are like, hello, I'm Dr. Jones and I received a board complaint. Here's my tips on how to navigate, So it's just kind of like a hush-hush world. And so thankfully, you have been a great resource for me in those moments of needing to support my client.
Because I've had so many board complaints. I know exactly how this works. Along with all my negative reviews, I'm a really unpopular person. So I'm happy to help.
Oh my goodness. Now, obviously, I know it can vary from state to state. And everything that we talk about here is really just what you've learned along the way. So there's no, I feel like, expertise advice here that we're, advocating. We're just openly talking about what we do know. So
in Texas. So, and I would assume many states
function similarly,
but at least if something is said here and you're like, oh, what does my state do? Good. Go figure it out. So that way you're prepared for your particular circumstances.
Yes. So can you kind of walk us through, I feel like most people don't know the actual process if, a patient or employee or whoever goes out and files a complaint with the board. My understanding is the board has to look into that in some particular way. Is that correct?
Yes, the board is required to.
Okay.
And what's funny, and again, sorry if this is going to be disjointed, but as I'm thinking of it, I want to say it so I don't forget it. But one thing is if the patient has put in a complaint, and suppose it was about like a bill or something like that, right? And then the patient actually does come to you, or you get the letter from the board, and then you're like, Miss Smith, what is this? Like, oh, well, I was just frustrated, and Sally at your front desk told me I had to pay this bill, and I just got mad, but, well, ma'am, we'll write that off for you, because remember, the plan was to use that money anyway towards this, but if you're not going to proceed with this, then we had always said you could get your money back. Oh, well, yeah, I guess I didn't understand that when Sally said that. I was just mad, but okay, fine, then I'll drop my complaint. Too late.
It's already been filed,
and the board has to look into it.
That's a good point.
And so, I don't know why I'm saying that in terms of what can you do about it. I guess you can't, but just knowing that the board has to, like that's state statutes passed by the Texas legislature. It's not that the board is going, we have another client here, we got another one we can get. They are required by law to look into that. And so that's where the snowball starts then, because they are required to get X number of notes and documentation from the dental office. And so I think some of the things that go awry in these cases, so I guess tip number one, I would make sure, dentist, you oversee the collection of the data that the board is asking for.
That's a great tip.
And what I mean by that is if you're just like, okay, Sally, the board is asking for, our chart notes and our x-rays, whatever, like this is what the board says they need. And Sally's like, okay. And she sends off the packet on your behalf. Well, Sally forgot to look in the perio charting folder and print off the perio chart. Sally forgot that there were notes in the document center that supported the consent that was given. Sally forgot to include the orthodontist request for those particular teeth.
Yeah.
So she sent what she thought needed to be sent. But now the board has received this information, and then it goes to a review panel. So if you're an orthodontist, they're going to try to send it to an orthodontist who has volunteered to be on this panel. And said orthodontist gets all of this documentation, and now they are required to go through and say, has standard of care been met in not just orthodontics, but in the overall care of this patient, including consent forms, billing, all of those kinds of things that now if they're going, oh, well, there was no consent form for this. Ding. Oh, there was no, the billing looks weird here. Why did she get charged for, this buildup when there's clearly no buildup on the subsequent x-rays, whatever, right? And so if there's no like check that they can do, now they might say, yeah, as far as from the orthodontic standpoint, like clearly they said that, the patient was going to be in braces this long, and then they were going to pay for 2 sets of retainers, and now the patient's on their 5th set of retainers, the patient's being ridiculous. Great. That allegation can go away, which was the allegation that the patient complained about to begin with, right? That can go away. However, you don't have a consent form, and you don't have the vitals on this day, and you don't have, whatever else documentation to support the billing of what you did. Oh, actually, you didn't end up charging for the billing. If you look later in the ledger, you see that you did reimburse for the buildup because Sally billed it out wrong to begin with, but y'all caught it, y'all reimbursed. But Sally didn't send the documentation for that. So even though you're free, you're not guilty of the main thing of, oh, he didn't give me my retainers. You've been absolved of that. But there's these other allegations still pending.
Yeah.
And now you're coming down to the board to justify why you are a shady dentist, because the verbiage is just atrocious. Like I would bawl if I saw that. I'd probably have a heart attack. My heart would race so fast with, you are, I'll have to think of the verbiage here in a minute, but it's terrible verbiage. Like
No.
You are, basically the scum of the earth for charging this buildup that you didn't do. You should go to jail, right? Like that's the vibe that you feel like, I murdered somebody. No, it's just a buildup we accidentally charged for. But anyway, the verbiage is like that intense, right? So, and now you've got to go defend yourself. So all of that to say, if you yourself are overseeing this, and I guess my advice would be, if you were the one who was reviewing this packet, like pretend like you were on the board. If you were reviewing this packet, just everything connect.
Right.
And then if you yourself are going, crap, you're right, we didn't get a consent form for that day, or we didn't do this, then maybe you yourself can write your own asterisk, no consent obtained on this day. But if you look at this other day, we have that we did consent on here. I acknowledge that I didn't have the consent for that particular day, but we assumed we were covered by this. Going forward, I will make sure, right?
Yeah.
Now, will that get it thrown out? I don't know. But at least it looks like you've done your due diligence to, defend
Right.
where your stance or where the mishap could have occurred. But if you just kind of send in your records and you have no idea, and then you get blindsided back by like all of these allegations, you're like, well, but you could have avoided all of that to begin with if you had just looked at the packet you were sending in.
So take that seriously. I think that's probably where some people get off is, oh, this terrible, patient filed this complaint and it's so stupid. It's they're not going to even pay any attention to it. It's ridiculous. And so they don't put enough effort or emphasis into that initial package because they're thinking, this patient's crazy. Nothing's going to happen with this. But you can it's opening, you described it one time as the can of worms is opened. Once you send in those documents, they can find you for
and
anything.
They have to, right? Yeah. Like it's not like they're, in theory, you're supposed to. So my analogy that works in my head has been, if you are driving, if you get pulled over for a speeding ticket and the speed limit was 30 and you are going 32, should you get a ticket for that? And that depends on the cop.
Yeah. Right?
Like, yeah, by the letter of the law, you should get a ticket. And most of us are going, 32 and a 30.
Come on, yeah.
Come on. But, you should get a ticket because you were speeding above the speed limit. Now, you could get that cop that's going to write you that citation. And you don't have a leg to stand on because you were going 32 and a 30. But what if you were going, 27 in a, or what is it? What is in a school zone in Texas? Most of them are 20. I mean, that's a bigger deal. Like most cops, if you were going 22 and a 20 during a school zone, most cops are going to get you for that.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you think about it, you're like, oh, it's just 2 over in both scenarios. But the scenarios are very different.
Right.
Right? Now let's go back to the 32 in a 30 zone. Say the cop's like, okay, fine. You don't need to get a ticket. Like, I'm going to write you, consider this your warning. But while they're there, they discover that your inspection is
out,
your taillight's out. And so how much grace are they going to give you? Mm-hmm. So if you have a taillight out, your sticker's expired, and you didn't signal and you were going 2 over.
Yeah.
Like, should you be like, remiss of all of that? Like, maybe you've got a really nice cop, but it's a gamble, right? Mm-hmm. So they pull you over and they can look at all those things. And is the cop being an ass? Maybe in your opinion they are, but then we got to remember the cop's job is to protect the safety of the public.
Yeah.
And so now, if you're the person that was doing 32 and a 30, but then tomorrow you run the red light, and now they're like, well, that cop could have caught you yesterday, and they didn't. They gave you grace, and now you killed somebody in this crosswalk. Mm-hmm. So that's what, and you might be going, well, obviously I'm not going to go that fast and kill somebody, but there are people that are.
Right.
And so now that cop has to speak for and go, man, like, we should have been harder on that person, and now public safety is at risk. So that's how the board has to look at these. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, if the patient blamed you for cutting their lip while you were doing a filling, and that was a lip bite, there was no burn mark, there was nothing, but the patient complained and somebody decided it was, potentially that the burr, they want you to come down to Austin and explain what happened. Okay, yeah, that's a lip bite. Yeah, that makes more sense. Great. But you didn't have a perio chart for that patient. And that patient's a 65-year-old male who has 22 teeth left. And you can see on the x-ray there's quite a bit of bone loss. Why aren't you taking care of that patient? Mm-hmm. You're not being comprehensive in the health of that patient. They're trusting you with the health. You billed out for an exam. You're partaking, but you didn't do a thorough and full exam.
Yeah.
So from a public safety standpoint, how many other patients are you not perio probing on?
Yeah.
How many others are you letting bone loss and losing teeth, and now you're getting to do their all on fours? Is that what you're doing? Being, negligent in their other needs. And so now, are you a good dentist, and are you protecting your patients? So yeah, you're right. That patient bit their lip, but you might be showing a pattern of providing substandard care by not having a perio chart on this patient that clearly has perio. How many other patients are you doing that to? So, and that's where you get into that. It depends. It depends on your lawyer. It depends on how you present. It depends on, and remember, your chart is part of how you present. Mm-hmm. If your chart's a disaster, you look like a disaster. And so to me, it's all like this, the optics matter. And so the fewer things that you have to where somebody can get you on. Are your consents in order? Is your ledger a hot mess? Are your notes consistent? Do you use templates that are clearly like, if I pulled 10 of your charts and all 10 patients got 2 carpules of lidocaine, really? You did a buccal pit on tooth number 30 and you did a bridge on the lower left quadrant, and they both got 2 carpules of lidocaine.
Right.
So that's your chart, a hot mess. Like, we can't rely on your chart for anything. That's how you present. So now the board has to figure out, are you a menace to society or not? And they have a snapshot, and that's it. They have literally a snapshot, one patient. And, as dentists, we're going, I can't be expected to be perfect with everything. I cannot be expected to do everything in my office. I task my assistant with getting that note put in. Why she just clicks on 2 carpules for every patient, I don't know, but I pay her. She's not doing her job. I pay the front to scan in the consent. I can't help that they didn't do that. My friends, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do. Because we're all in the same boat. However, what are you doing about it? Because it is what it is. Are you staying later to check your charts and counsel? Are you checking your clinical notes? Are you not? What are you doing? Do you have to see fewer patients? That sucks. That's not fair. It is what it is. So I think that, to me, I think that's where people, get their panties in a twist, and rightfully so. But at the end of the day, it is what it is.
Yeah. It's the standard that everyone's held to.
Yeah. And so it's just, how do you present? And your chart notes, that's how you present. That's part of your outfit.
Yeah. It represents you. Truly, it represents you. So I want you to back up and tell me some examples of what documentation would they ask for? Because I do have that question come across, like, what all are they going to ask for? And I think I've messaged you about that before.
I mean, so they want all the clinical notes, they want all the x-rays, all the consents, all the EOBs
for that patient.
Yep. And they want all the schedule, like the day that patient was in your office, every time that patient was in your office.
So can you tell, because I have had somebody ask me about that. Why did they ask for that?
It's actually funny how helpful that can be, because a lot of times the allegation is something like that you are you over-sedating patients? So if the law says that you cannot, leave the room once the patient's sedated, or you need to be monitoring from this time to this time, whatever it is, and you look at their schedule and you're like, there's no way you could be in there because you sedated 5 kids that morning and you were the only doctor in the office.
Okay.
And so if you're kind of saying, oh no, I check all of my patients and we do this for all of my patients, that is physically not possible here. Or during COVID time, like, you weren't supposed to be doing any elective dental care. Well, your schedule shows that your hygienist was seeing patients scaling.
Right.
So there, now you can see that. So there's certain things that can be gleaned from looking at the schedule to see, like, does that make sense? The patient is claiming that you were only in there for 2 minutes, and you're claiming that's not true. Looking at your schedule, I believe you, because there were 5 patients on the schedule that day. I believe that you gave the patient the time that they needed. So what is the patient talking about? Or versus, you saw 50 patients that day, no wonder that filling looks like that.
Right.
Because you were the only doctor in the building, right? Yeah. So I think that's some of why. I don't know exactly why else, but those are things that I've kind of picked up on. They want, I think usually you're going to have to submit all your CE as well.
Okay.
So that better be in place. And people will look at your CE. Like, they will look and go, your CE, like, your license was expiring on this day, and you did 24 hours of CE the day before, because all the printouts show, like, at that time slot is when you did them.
Wow.
Or looking at and going, okay, well, you're a general dentist, but you're doing all on 4s, but all of your CE is what Crest provides about varnish.
Wow.
Okay, then how are you considering yourself? Like, maybe that's the problem. Maybe why this all on 4 didn't work out well, because all of your continuing education was not an all on 4s. Yeah. And maybe that's what you need more work on. So here, as a board, we're going to assign you,
wow,
20 hours of hands-on implants, because clearly you think you're an expert in implants, and yet you had these 3 patient complaints, and your all on 4s are garbage. And maybe that's the problem, because your continuing education doesn't match up with what you claim that you want to do.
That's such a good takeaway for listeners, which CE is critically important. We know that. But man, in the case that you are having to submit that, it needs to make sense. That is, and I think, such a good takeaway.
In our defense, we're all super busy. We all kind of forget about our continuing education until it's getting closer, and you're like, damn it, I got to figure this out. But I think that's what sets apart providers. If you are a checkbox person and you're like, okay, met that requirement, check, got all my requirements done. I challenge you as a provider. To me, I love continuing education because it reminds me of where I need to get better. What's new? What's out there? Am I keeping up to what's the standard right now? And if you're checkbox, I just did what I needed to do to meet my credentials, I guess that's disappointing to me when I hear that. For example, even like PALS. I have to take PALS because I'm a moderate anesthesia level provider in Texas. And so I've got to take PALS. I hate PALS. I despise PALS. But at the same time, I know I'm refreshing it and doing it because I've got to keep my patients safe. And am I going to remember all of those details about what I need to do should I have a patient crash in my office? Like, there is a point to it. And so for the people that just are like, oh yeah, I listened to the webinar part of it and I just had it on, in the background while I was checking patients. Have you done yourself a service to remind you of some of these things? Are you doing your patient a service by just checkboxing? And so I don't mean that as maybe I do mean that as a critique. I don't know. Y'all can hate me for saying that. That's fine. But I think that is just one other thing. So they will want you to submit your CEs. Okay. Friendly reminder here, you may not be the one that is in the hot seat, but you might be the second opinion, and you're going to be sending in all your stuff too. Now, I rarely see that it's, like they'd open an investigation on a second provider if they saw egregious things. Like, usually you're not, but I think it's still worth knowing that your notes could be pulled for not anything you did.
I'm so glad you said that. Yes, because I forgot about that. And you're exactly right. If they went to a dentist afterwards or a second opinion, then that dentist can actually be called up in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will tell you what kind of brought this back up into our sphere. I had a colleague reach out to me, hadn't heard from this fellow in years. And, anyway, so get on the phone with him. And somehow, I don't know why he thought to reach out to me, but he didn't come out with it right away. I had to beat around the bush. I'm like, okay, he's so embarrassed by this. He doesn't want to say that he has this board complaint. But whatever he was saying, I was like, this is an odd line of conversation. Anyway, come to find that that's why he was calling me. And he was like, well, you always try to do your best for patients and this and that. And then when a patient this, what do you do about that? I'm like, I don't see adults, so I don't know what I would do about that if I was you. Then figured out it was a board complaint. And so I think some of the questions he asked me, I was like, that's good to know that he's practiced for 20 years and now he's faced with this, right, which tells me you're a good dentist. If you are not getting complaints, and they look at that too. They're like, this is somebody who's, I guess the question is, have they been shady for 20 years and just lucky? Or have they done good dentistry and this is, people are crazy nowadays. And so that what tends to be, I think the belief or hope. And I guess in this case, one of the questions he asked me was, I guess something about he did anterior teeth and the lady wasn't happy. And he's like, and then they offered to redo it and a colleague did it and she liked his version better. And then anyway, and I think what it boils down to that he didn't offer, but I deduced, I was like, did you have a post-cementation x-ray? And he's like, well, no, usually we take one, but that one I didn't. Okay, friend, that's why you're in trouble here, because clearly another dentist took a post-cementation or took an x-ray and saw open margins, and that's why you're in the boat you're in. And perhaps that dentist, going back to the episode a few episodes ago where you're like, one dentist inadvertently or advertently sent
blamed.
You down. Who did this crappy work? The margins are open, and now the patient's complaining. And now you don't really have a leg to stand on because you don't have a post-cementation x-ray. So, what do you do in that case? Then at that point, my advice to him was make sure you've got a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I guess then he's like, well, I do. And that's where I think the board looks at a lot of these small ones like that. Like, it's just kind of like, okay, your patient's complaining, there were open margins. Do you want to just admit it, sign this, and get like a fee that you have to pay that may or may not go on your record and whatever. So he's like, what do I do with this letter? He's like, I was about to sign it because I just wanted this to go away. And his lawyer was like, are you sure you don't want to go to Austin? Like, think about it before you sign it. And I was like, well, I'm so glad your lawyer said that to you, because from my viewpoint, you're a very likable guy. You're a very genuine and authentic guy. And I think you going to Austin, and he's like, I'm just petrified. I don't want to go to Austin. I don't want to. And I'm like, dude, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
It's called an informal settlement conference. It's not that informal. It can get very intense. However, you would present very well because you're a likable guy. You're not defensive. You're not snippy. So I guess that would be another piece of advice. If you do find yourself in Austin, behave. It sounds so stupid, but the people that don't behave are like, you're just sending yourself down the river. Because then people start going, if you're going to treat your own colleagues this way, then no, I believe the patient when they say you were an asshole and you were arrogant, you wouldn't listen to her, because you're not even listening to us. We're trying to have a dialogue and you're shutting us down. You'd be surprised at the number of people that present that way. It's so stupid. Hotheads. So I was like, you wouldn't present that way at all. Like, you can see your genuine care oozes out. And just explain what happened. We tried. And of course, I don't know why I didn't get a post-cementation x-ray that day. This has been a good learning experience for me to go, you're right, we're not super diligent about that. And then I think he said something like, she was already so upset that they didn't want to push her to get an x-ray. I'm like, but is that documented in your notes? And he's like, I don't know. Okay, well, there's
another tip for him.
But when you're in Austin, you could say, I guess I just didn't think to put that in my notes, but she was combative because of this. She was upset. And I didn't push her to get an x-ray. And no, on reflection, I know I should have done that. Yeah. But we did everything we could to get her to be happy. We offered this, we offered that. And I was like, at the end of the day, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to give you the same offer they gave you before, so you're no worse off, or they could dismiss it. Yeah. Because they see the sincerity coming out, and you're able to fill in the dots that they couldn't catch on paper.
From paper, yeah.
So I guess my thoughts are, if you're an asshole, then maybe don't go. Sign the paper and move on. If you know you're going to be a hothead there and you can't control yourself, then
and if you don't know, ask somebody if you are. If you are personally unaware, just get feedback. Hey, do I present well in person? Do I seem like a calm, rational, reasonable, kind of nice person?
And a person with some humility. Yeah. And if that's not you, be honest with yourself and sign the paper, pay the fee, and move on.
Yeah.
But if you have any sense of genuineness and going, I really just want to explain my side of this, you really don't have much to lose, usually.
I think that's a good takeaway, too.
And then if you are opening yourself to a dialogue, that is the right avenue for you. Because, again, they may not be able to do anything. Like, it is what it is. You did leave open margins everywhere, and the assumption has to be, who else are you leaving open margins on? Mm-hmm. Is this the way you practice? Is this your standard of care? In which case they're tasked with protecting the public. So but if you can talk about what you're doing different going forward, and a lot of good lawyers will help you through that. If you hire an attorney that's like, oh, just give me your forms, okay, here's the letter we're going to submit, and they're having you write your own letter, and I don't know. I think that would be the other piece of advice. Now, I don't know the process of how you get a lawyer. Like, do you automatically call your malpractice? Do they assign you one? I don't know. But there are some good lawyers who advocate for you, and others who let you just do all your own talking and sink your own ship, and that's unfortunate. So I think the advice is definitely always have a lawyer.
Okay.
Always. It just does not look good when you walk in and you don't have a lawyer. Like, it's cringe-worthy because we don't know. It almost looks like, do you take this seriously enough?
I was about to say, it looks like they're not taking it seriously.
Yeah. Are you being cheap for no reason? I think that's what it looks like, that you are clueless.
Yeah.
So get a lawyer. And then how do you know if you have a good lawyer? I don't know the answer to either, other than if it looks like they're not really advocating for you and asking and helping you connect the dots. Like, a good lawyer will say, dude, why didn't you have a post-cementation x-ray? Like, that's a problem. You see that's a problem, right? So what are we doing to mitigate this going forward? Versus the lawyer that's like, oh, okay, you didn't have a post-cementation x-ray. Okay, well, that allegation stands. Next. What else do you have? You know what I mean? So that's a not good lawyer.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, and again, this is one of those areas that we're probably not going to get anywhere with, but it's like, oh my gosh, how do you interview a lawyer? What are the questions you should ask to determine if that person is going to be a good lawyer?
I think my biggest piece of advice would be pretend like you're the reviewer. Pretend like you're the board dentist that is having to connect these dots and judge you. Mm-hmm. So if you are judging yourself and going, okay, but on paper, you're right, it looks like this. And then what are we doing about that to prove that I'm not a crappy dentist? Mm-hmm. I had a crappy day. Mm-hmm. That was a shitty patient. Like, that's not me. That's not a reflection of my work. Or it was, and now this is what I'm doing to improve. This was a good moment for me to say, you know what, you're right. Like, why am I seeing all these kids when I'm not qualified to see kids? Yeah. And let me either quit seeing kids, or let me go back and do more training and take more pediatric specific CE courses from the AAPD, and not just like the webinar on CREST. You know what I mean? So I think those are things to think about. One other question he did ask me that I thought was interesting. He was like, hey, what about Dallas County Dental Society? Don't they have a peer review thing? And I'm like, they do, and it's a fantastic resource. However, once the patient complains to the state board, peer review can't do anything about it.
Okay.
So if you had any inkling that this patient is upset and might complain, could have that opportunity been where you were like, you know what, can we go and discuss this with a neutral party? This might be helpful for us. Although I think that may be where most of us are like, I just hope it goes away. I just hope it goes away.
Yeah.
Like, I hope this patient, sees my side and just goes away. And most of the time we don't even know they've complained because until we get the complaint letter. So just knowing though that in a case, if there's ever a case where you're like, I know this patient's not happy and they're going to complain, can we go remediate? Is that what the right word is? Mediate. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Can we go mediate this? And I don't know.
It could potentially help that situation. Yeah. Okay.
What else? What else do your patients ask about? Or
main tips that I'm hearing is, number one, get on top of the documentation. That if Sally's getting that all together for you, then you need to. That is a representation. That paperwork is an ambassador for you. Essentially, it's representing you before the review committee and before the board. So review that and try to make sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted. Then get a lawyer is the other thing that I've heard you say. Also, don't assume that you won't be called in on a case if it's not the patient that complained against you. If you were the doctor behind a particularly negative case, then it could be that you're pulled into that as well.
And when I say pulled in, I think just your records. I think it's the very rare instance where they're like, oh my God, dentist number 2 is actually worse than dentist number 1. They have even worse records, and they're, clearly look at their notes. They're giving 15 carpals to every patient under the age of 10. Like, this is a menace to society. So I think those are rare, but it could happen, I guess.
Okay.
But just the fact that your records could be looked at is unsettling for most of us.
It's a good reminder that board complaint or no board complaint, those records are critical. So you've got to do your part on that. It also sounds like consider, if you have the option to go in person, if you've gotten a settlement letter, you should strongly consider that settlement letter. If you're an arrogant or you present as a person that is arrogant, then you should probably consider that settlement letter. If you're a person that presents well in person, then you might want to look at the chance to actually go in front of the state board, but make sure you have a lawyer with you. Get a good lawyer and make sure that you've got somebody that's actually going to advocate for you. We talked about some of the documentation, which is normally the questions I get is what's about to happen. And so normally I talk about the intensity of having to get all of those documents together. One of the things that I learned early on from you, which was helpful for me to understand, which a lot of people don't know, is that step 1 is the review committee. So it doesn't go straight to the board that is reviewing your case. There is kind of like an intermediate step. And can you just describe what that is?
So once the investigator collects all the documents, because they're supposed to, and please meet those deadlines. Don't dilly-dally on that. The other good advice I could give is know the rules in the state. Like, it's a pain in the butt to go on the state's website and look at the rules of what's required of us, but it's pretty clear. So that way you can do your own, like, shoot, they are going to look at, did I take vitals at this point? Did I, something like nitrous, where people are like, oh, the patient was on nitrous for 45 minutes. They're going to ding you on that because they want to know, was it, you started it at 10 and you ended at 10:45. So just to say 45 minutes is not the format they wanted in Texas. Anyway, so know the rules, know all of that. And then, so it will go to, like I was saying earlier, if it was an orthodontic case, they'll find an orthodontic reviewer who they have. That person will go through everything, write a report of their findings. Then that report goes to a second orthodontic reviewer. That person either
writes their report.
Or, well, they either concur with that report, and then that's the final. They're like, yep, I agree with everything they said. Or if they have their own findings, or they disagree with the first reviewer, then they write their own report.
Gotcha.
In which case it would go to a third reviewer, and then the third reviewer has to pick which one they agree with. So by the time it gets to the board's hands are kind of tied in that this is what, like, and it works in both cases, actually. It works like either the board reviewers look at it and go, man, how did 2 reviewers miss this? You know, like, clearly from my viewpoint, like this. And maybe they missed it because they didn't have the same set of data that we had. Because now it's come to the board, and the dentist gets the allegation list, and they're like, of course I have these consents. And so then they send them in their rebuttal. And so it's like, oh, well, the set of reviewers didn't have that piece of information.
Makes sense.
But it could also work in the dentist's favor, where the reviewers are like looking at the allegation of, open margins. But as a reviewer, as a board person, you're looking at this and you're like, dude, this has nothing to do with open margins. This has to do with blah, 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 blah. But there's not an allegation to say that. So in a case like that would be like a patient hospitalization. And the reviewers are like, oh, well, yeah, they did potentially overdose this patient, or they didn't report this in time. In Texas, it's 30 days for reporting hospital, whatever it is, right? And as a reviewer, you're looking at it and you're like, dude, this has nothing to do with the amount of local you gave. It has to do with that you didn't do a medical clearance to begin with, and the patient is obese and has a cardiac condition and is an uncontrolled diabetic. Yeah. You shouldn't have been seeing that patient to begin with, but there's no allegations as such. And so now we're tied. Like, we would love to get you on a higher thing. Now we can't do that because the stupid reviewers didn't, right? Like, so it could work either way.
That makes sense.
So anyway, all of that to say that there is a review process first before it even gets to the board, which is why it's so critical to make sure your documents are all in a row.
Yeah, don't treat that lightly. That's your one chance, really, to get this thing potentially dismissed so that it doesn't have to go to the board. Right.
The other thing I would say is if it is going to the board, this is my opinion, completely my opinion. You're allowed to do these hearings over Zoom. I just think you just look so much better that you're taking it that seriously. And I get, like, from my colleague's standpoint, that I don't want to go down there. I'm petrified. I can absolutely, I get that. And another loss of production because you're out for the day and traveling and all of that. But I tell you, it's still much different presenting if you're going to go through with the process, come live.
Yeah.
It's so much better. You look so much better than
That's a really good
Zoom.
tip too. So,
but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I think that's a strong opinion that people probably wouldn't consider. They're, like you said, they're probably trying to avoid that interaction at all costs. But there's a chance that could actually go in your favor.
I think at that point, even if you're the ass like we talked about and you don't present well, you're probably going to present worse on Zoom than you would live.
True. That's true. Yeah. This was super helpful. I do feel like you hit on a lot of the questions that if I have had a client in that particular situation, these are the questions that they're asking. And I think just understanding the whole process of, the goal is that board complaints never happen, but there's a chance that in a really good dentist lifetime, they might have one or two that pop up, or more for that matter. I mean, I feel like the longer we go in this very litigious society, that people are more apt to do things like that. And so I think it's a good reminder to be prepared. And if nothing else, if and when that board complaint hits your desk, you've at least got some knowledge on what could be part of the process. So
yeah, super cringe-worthy. Sorry to anybody that has vomited in their coffee cup.
It's true, but sometimes vomit is necessary, so vomit away and take notes.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, We want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.